Welcome, I'm Adam Green, and I'll be moderating what promises to be an exciting discussion about how financial services companies are accelerating their adoption of generative AI. I have with me Dan Kaysen, who heads up independent software sales for the financial services sector at Amazon Web Services. I also have Robert Hinovich, who heads up product marketing for enterprise AI at Cloudera, a hybrid platform for data, analytics, and AI. Robert is a former software engineer and data scientist, so should be in a position to explain the technical complexities to us. Great to have you both.
Adam.
Nice to be here.
So it's hard to imagine an industry better suited to AI than financial services. These firms generate huge amounts of data, and spotting patterns in that data can unlock massive benefits in everything from fraud detection and risk management to trading optimization and, of course, customer services. Firms are now investing heavily in AI infrastructure to deliver on this promise. With so much on the line in terms of capital expenditure and potential competitive advantage, getting this investment right is crucial. Tell me how the partnership between Cloudera and AWS is helping customers in financial services to deliver on their AI vision.
Well, thanks for the question. When I think about customer needs in financial services, really agility, innovation, speed of adoption, ROI are all key factors driving their success rates. And in order to do that, they really need comprehensive platforms that allows them to, one, meet their needs from a delivery performance standpoint, but compliance, governance, et cetera. But they need to be able to do it within the context of the environment that they're faced, which is going to be typically hybrid and multiple data architectures and access mechanisms that they need to implement. These are challenging problems, and no organization is going to be able to provide everything for every organization, not one. So organizational partnerships are key in making sure that people can be agile, and can be innovative. And when we look at what AWS brings to the table, really we have the cloud infrastructure for effectively running your AI solutions, building your AI solutions, et cetera, all the way from our GPU infrastructure to SageMaker and Bedrock and our data architectures all the way up to our higher level services like Amazon Q. But it's not everything. And many of our customers, particularly in the enterprise financial service space, has highly complex data infrastructure that they need to bring together in an effective way that those needs are challenging to meet with just AWS alone. And that's where our partners come in and really where our relationship with Cloudera shines, because many of our customers have existing infrastructure with Cloudera, and Cloudera provides services that makes it much easier to bring in the data sources that are going to be important for these AI solutions. So combining the two and really leveraging our partnership, AWS and Cloudera have been partners for probably about a decade at least. We have a strategic agreement in place to really help and work with our customers. And together we provide those resources that help accelerate those that apart or separately, we wouldn't be able to address for our customers. So it's really a win-win-win. AWS certainly benefits when customers use our platform as a Cloudera, but ultimately our customers benefit because they don't have to shortcut their requirements or their needs based on access to capabilities that a single provider may not have. And that's the beauty and the value of partnerships in this rapidly changing environment that we're all looking at and taking advantage of with generative AI.
Before we get onto infrastructure, what are financial services companies currently using GenAI to achieve? Dan, I'll come to you first. What use cases are you seeing FS customers implementing on AWS?
Amazon has a pretty broad platform for AI and generative AI, starting with our underlying infrastructure for hosting GPUs to data science platform with SageMaker, Bedrock for building and accessing GenAI models to higher level services like Amazon Q and Q Developer. So we get to see a pretty broad spectrum of what customers are doing. And across the board, we see them actively working with GenAI in what you would expect to be the standard productivity examples. You have people doing document generation and authoring and document review, email classification, those types of things. We also see some pretty good advancement in how they're trying to leverage generative AI for financial services line of business use cases. So we have some really great case studies with several of our customers, like Verafin, who's using generative AI for financial crimes analysis. Other organizations are doing call center optimization, like Principal Financial Group and Bank United. NYSE is using it for trading document analysis, and there are other cases around financial services that are wide open. The claims management, claims processing, New York Life, we have a great example there too. So in the LOB case, we're seeing a lot of momentum as well. The other place that I see really aggressive use is within infrastructure. For security, on IT security, event management analysis, and probably one of the most prevalent and most, I would say, advanced usage is in application development. Software engineering and code generation and code analysis is something that's been extremely popular with our customers. And for Amazon, we have our Amazon Q Developer platform for that too. So pretty aggressive use across the board. Still a lot of ways to go.
Robert, are there any specific use cases you think are worth highlighting over and above what Dan's mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. The way I think about it, there are, four core buckets when it comes to financial services. Let's start with process automation. That could be document analysis and processing. So think of document summarization, drafting documents from multiple notes and other documents that you ingest into the system. That could be combined with a Q&A chatbot with additional elements for visual presentation of that data. The other bucket would be customer service. So think of chatbots that, say, provide financial advice or perhaps the next best action for you to take. Another one, decision making. So risk modeling, fraud prevention within an org. And then finally, marketing, something that's very close to me. So think of hyper-personalized campaigns. We can really dial in and then tweak them and sort of have all of these state-of-the-art GenAI models help with that. Of course, dynamic content generation. We've seen a lot of that lately. And probably one item that I'm really excited about is deep market research. So think of deep search or deep research from Gemini or ChatGPT, where you spin up, you give it a certain topic, and it goes away and does all the research for you, looking at tens or hundreds of sources while your coffee is being made, and then you come back and you have all of this market research done for you. So a lot of these buckets that I feel not only are useful horizontally, but very specifically here for the financial firms.
Gen AI obviously comes with well-known risks, particularly around data security, reliability, accuracy. And this is a very regulated, sensitive sector as well. How can financial services firms manage these risks? And are there any sector-specific risks with AI that are perhaps more pertinent to the finance industry? Dan, we can start with you.
Yeah, and this is an interesting area because financial services firms have been doing AI for a long time, probably one of the longest industries. Quantitative analytics and underwriting and all that. Predictive analytics have been 10, 15 years at least. So many of them have existing governance infrastructure and processes for managing AI. The challenge is that those organizations and the group and the data that they're dealing with was very controlled, very managed, and done by a very small set of people. Along comes generative AI. Everybody's doing it, and they're accessing all data. And it generates or it introduces risk that organizations hadn't considered before. And so some of the key things, one, again, the broad use. It's not just confined to a set of data scientists who have process management under their belt. Everybody's either trying to build or consume these things. The second thing is many of the models that people are using were created by other organizations. And governance and understanding, explainability and interpretability of those models is extremely difficult because, one, they didn't build them themselves. Two, the nature of LLMs and similar type models, foundation models, is such that they are highly complex and extremely opaque. So those things make that really difficult to do. Many of these models, many are accessing outside the company's infrastructure, which raises privacy concerns and potential for data leakage and IP leakage that everybody has to deal with. They didn't have to do when they were just managing their own models. And the other interesting thing is that we've all seen with generative AI, outcomes can be variable. It's indeterminate in some cases, even with very, very careful prompt engineering. Hallucinations can exist, models change, et cetera, with different iterations. So all these things introduce new risks to organizations that they haven't had to deal with before in a controlled AI governance framework. So some of the sector-specific things that are unique, or not necessarily unique, but very important in financial services, come back to the explainability, potential for bias and fairness, et cetera. In many cases, being able to provide complete auditability to regulators is critical. You can't say, we don't know why this one person was underwritten for a policy and this other person wasn't, even though they appear to be very similar in characteristics. Without that explainability, without really good governance, all the way starting with the data you're using for these, it's going to be extremely difficult for organizations to meet regulatory compliance requirements. And that's a big issue that everybody needs to face. To manage it, it really starts with just establishing one overall vision and clear, responsible AI policies in the organization, creating AI use governance. And this is kind of another thing too, like I said before, if it was just a small organization, small group of people really having broad AI use governance and policy wasn't that big of a deal. But now that everybody, I guarantee you just about everybody in every organization is using it in some way. And most organizations have no visibility to what's going on. Implementing guardrails, and it really, to me, it starts with having a really good data governance strategy and really good data architecture and clear architecture of how you're managing that, because that's going to be where the root of all the explainability, interpretability is going to come from.
Interesting. Robert, what are some of the risks that you've encountered in addition to the ones that Dan's mentioned?
You got to remember that, to guard against all of the inaccuracies that these models can return to the end user, it all starts with a foundation of a well-governed, secured, and trusted data. That is the essence, right? Garbage in, garbage out, as the saying goes. So many of our customers, they achieve that foundation with a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation architecture, that keeps the models aligned to the enterprise context. And additionally, we also like to talk about being able to ingest and provide these models with real-time, or the way we like to call it also, fresh data. So instead of relying on the open internet data that these models have, making sure that they always have access to that internal fresh data within an organization. The other thing you have to consider, and then alluded to that, is that all of these open source models, take Llama 4, they were pre-trained on all of the internet, all of the open internet data sets. That could be ebooks, that could be Wikipedia, that could even be Reddit. In which case, you, as an individual within an organization who's managing these models, may want to take these models and fine-tune them with your internal data sets. This way, these models have an inherent bias towards your preferred answers and the internal documentation. Or if you're coding, your code structure. They understand the code. They know, how you make comments. They know how many tabs you have to make, for example, if you're using Python. So both then, if you take the RAG and then a fine-tuning, you can ground your models within your financial organization to that organization's truth, right? And with techniques such as, let's say, FLAIR, which is forward-looking, active, retrieval augmented generation, you can further reduce these hallucinations. And that's just one of the many techniques that are out there. And then mentioned guardrails for large language models. There are multiple of them before the data is actually retrieved and returned to the user. Of course, there's input rails, so they scan for the prompt to see if this is even appropriate. Will it even start to look for an answer? And of course, an output. Once it provides the answer, what's its things or reasons through an answer? Like, can I actually return it back to the user? But then internally, there's also, there could be a dialogue guardrail that then sends it to retrieve certain information. It checks for, do you have access to that data? If you do, well, let's grab the data. And then if you're talking about agentic flows, for example, can I actually execute this specific tool to perform an action on your behalf? So there's many different steps that organizations have to think through to make sure that when they produce and put these models to production, they'll actually be accurate and minimize all kinds of hallucinations to provide that proper answer and proper business outcome. So taking a step back and going back to governance, that is really critical in the financial sectors. And then firms should consider one is end-to-end lineage, right? So you have lineage from when the data is ingested at the edge or other systems to when the data actually makes it to the model training or perhaps fine-tuning to then model deployment and then back and its version. And you can track every single piece of that data, how it's been modified, who had access to it, who made some kind of transformation. Secure access and observability are also key. Not only data, but also AI lifecycle. So then you can monitor things like model drift, bias, data leakage, and regulatory non-compliance. So with governance and observability, they enable model explainability. And then you can add to it architectural innovations like Apache Iceberg that support time travel and reproducibility. So in many ways, you'll mitigate the risks by automating many of these processes. So then by implementing the right techniques that I've mentioned and the proper governance frameworks, both on the process side and technology side, the firms can then significantly reduce internal friction in accelerating the shift of their projects from the pilot stage where they might linger for a long time to accelerated push to the production stage.
Let's move on to the infrastructure questions and the talking points around this. I saw an interesting statistic in a recent report from the Enterprise Strategy Group that said 66% of organizations prefer a hybrid approach that combines on-premise data storage to manage all of the critical data, including customer transactions and sensitive financial information, and then leveraging cloud infrastructure to scale specific workloads and less sensitive data. So this hybrid approach allows organizations to build AI models in one infrastructure and then bring that model to the others, which is key for leveraging the full capabilities of AI. Robert, does that create specific support requirements, would you say, for the financial services industry?
Yeah, I mean, Adam, we've definitely seen that. Due to the regulatory environment that these firms operate in, and the sensitivity to a lot of their data, the financial firms have been, slower than say, firms that operate in, real estate market and whatnot. And they've been slower to move to the cloud than many other industries. Now, that being said, in 2025, nearly every financial services firm has a clear and very intentional cloud strategy. They're moving workloads that make sense to the public cloud, and that absolutely extends from the data to the AI lifecycle. So when it comes to model training, model fine-tuning, especially when you need that burst capacity that you may not have on-prem, that's where cloud is super key and very important to them. That also provides scale and elasticity. And they're all very useful in the actions that they take and cost effective. So then you have a lot of sensitive data that is likely to remain on-prem. Think of tens or hundreds of petabytes of data, which is as we all know, very expensive to move back and forth between the cloud and on-prem. And that's going to remain on-prem, the way we see and we talk to our customers and what they tell us for the foreseeable future. And that creates, specific support needs, especially around secure data movement, hybrid governance, accessibility, observability, and of course, version control. So we see often this hybrid architecture as an approach to gain all the necessary cloud skills and confidence of our customers. So then in this case, they can leverage AWS and on-prem environments together with Cloudera as that unified access layer. And as they gain all of that additional exposure to the cloud, they generally find it much more suitable and advantageous for other workloads to move to the cloud. So in the end, it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, and obviously AWS is well known for providing public cloud. What are your thoughts in relation to Robert's observations about the hybrid strategy and the comparative advantage of cloud and on-prem and the different contexts where each makes sense?
Yeah, I concur. Yeah, the customers that I work with it's all very clear that they're, at least for now, maintaining a hybrid approach. And what's driving that is not so much, I would say 5-10 years ago, it was concerned about security and privacy. We've pretty much overcome most of that. Most of the big, not the concerns, but the friction today to that is just agility and speed to market for the things they're trying to do. So if you look at, it'll be a big number, but approximately 10% of production systems in financial services run in the cloud today. And that means 90% of their data and their other systems are on premises. And these organizations want to do innovative things. And they all typically will have strategies and they have a plan to get to cloud. They want to be in cloud over time. They want to have their data migrated, and at one point, the plan was we're just going to pull everything into a big master data warehouse and manage it from there. And what they realize is that it's going to take a long time to do those things, to do the big transformational architecture things. We have to do them right, and we have to do them in a measured fashion. But we can't wait to do the things that we want to do with the pace of change in the industry. So if we had to tell a customer, hey, you got to wait to use generative AI until you get everything into the cloud, or you get all your data migrated into a single data where they're never going to get it done. So a lot of the interest and the need to really be able to work in a hybrid environment effectively is driven by the need to innovate quickly. And for customers, that means changing the strategy, or at least creating a parallel strategy to broader architectural transformation to how do we bring these sources of data, these systems together, and how do we manage it effectively so that it is, one, faster time to market, not just because we don't have to go through the processes of governance, et cetera, of changing systems entirely, but two, it's simplified so that people building the solutions don't have to reorient their mind every time they're accessing something new. So, and that's really a dual strategy that organizations have. The long-term strategy, I'd say that the passing game in football terms is major data center and infrastructure transformation. The running game is what are we going to do to make it easier for us and faster for us to build solutions quickly in a way that doesn't sacrifice governance and regulatory compliance, performance, security, and all those types of things. So they're managing both, and a hybrid strategy gives them the ability to get that done while they innovate today.
What kind of AI architecture do financial services companies need to get the most from what's available today in generative AI? How should they think about the right way of organizing their architecture for AI specifically? Robert, can you start us off?
Yeah. So when it comes to financial firms, let's start with data management. Once you have data, once you transform the data, then you can perform analytics on it. And of course, AI is sort of the final step in all of this, that one that gives you the highest return on all of your data, on all of the investments you've made over the years. But all of that, from data to analytics to AI, that can live in an architecture that is very distributed, hybrid for most of our customers. So all of that needs to have that unified security, governance, and control. Again, going back to the edge to AI, from the moment you ingest every single piece of data and transform it and publish the model, and if you want to publish model back to the edge, you need to have that end-to-end layer that's unified again with security, governance, and control. Then we can talk about what I mentioned earlier, RAG patterns to leverage real-time data ingestion. So then you have that fresh data available all the time to these models. Every single, especially in financial industry, right? That could be millisecond changes to what happens. And so the models have to have as quick as possible access to the latest and greatest data. Some processes, of course, that can be done at the end of the day, but others, they basically need real time. So having that capability is critical. And then back to RAG, you want to make sure that they're grounded, right? Grounded, and again, accurate and up to date in all of that data. Again, improving that accuracy, reducing what currently is being called hallucinations. So back to the governance, if you combine it with observability, then you can talk about model explainability, which again is essential. Dan alluded to that. And with these models that have billions to trillions of parameters, it is more important than ever to be able to do so in some fashion, or at least have an understanding how that model will perform. It was quite a different story back in the traditional or classical AI, or machine learning. These models are massive. So having that capability is essential to do, at least be able to discuss in some ways of how these models will perform, have enough experiment to where you have confidence that they will produce the required results. For us, the other piece that we've recently noticed is also a desire for low-code, no-code tooling. That enhances collaboration between not just data scientists, but now we're talking about business users and analysis all working together. For example, recently we released AI studios. So you got the RAG, the fine-tuning, synthetic data, and creating agents in a very sort of drag and drop, low-code type of tooling. And that enlarges the space of the users that can collaborate with an organization to create very useful use cases. And it's not just up to data scientists or perhaps AI engineers to do so. Now everybody can participate that and bring these models to bear. Of course, you want to have specific processes, how it should be done, and so forth. But all in all, that accelerates to many more use cases that can be pushed, especially with data scientists and AI engineers. It's hard to get a handle of them, or in other words, they're also very expensive individuals to have within your organization. So enabling that is key. So then we go to that self-service. So self-service where you use or utilize natural language. In our case, that's English, because not everyone in a financial institution, financial firm, they need to or should be required to write SQL. SQL can become very convoluted when you have these very complex joins, inner joins, outer joins. Anybody that's done SQL before knows how complex and how long it can take to actually get data extracted from some of these databases. So bottom line, that all of the data related questions should be answered through a natural language prompt, regardless of what type of database is on the other end. And that will also allow pretty much everybody to participate and always have that data available to whichever question they may have. So then the big focus in the end is how you maximize the return on investment while you minimize the total cost of ownership, especially in the current economic climate. This can start by having, again, an end-to-end data and AI platform that allows the firms to focus not just on the deployment of a few use cases, but rather have that environment ready to have an accelerated deployment of hundreds to thousands of simple and then maybe a little bit slower of these more advanced use cases to production. So for these simpler use cases, once you actually have the business requirements, you should be able to deploy a net new GenAI application to production within a week.
Dan, how would you go about building an effective AI architecture for a financial firm? Obviously, every company is different, but are there any high-level principles that you would look to?
Yeah, ditto to everything Robert just said, by the way. And he must have seen some of my SQL because the complexity is high. It's interesting. And one thing I do want to call out too is kind of a very unique but great observation in that the move to generative AI it will change how people build solutions. And it's not just because we have effective code generation tools and like QDeveloper, et cetera, too. Solutions will, you look at the platforms in the direction of agentic AI, what we're going to see is the advent of many microservices or agents out there that are going to be orchestrated by governed workflows. And that's a different way of thinking about how to solve problems than the procedural process that maybe people do today. So thinking to the future about that and thinking organizations should be thinking about how does this change the solutions that we build, and do we have to get out of the traditional mindset for how applications are built? That's kind of one. That's a broad scoping thing. The other things that Robert had mentioned in terms of the importance of governance, infrastructure, effective data architecture governance, and the ability to work across hybrid source, all part of that too. One thing that I've seen, it's kind of an interesting trend, the interest in the value that people are seeing in the use cases is so strong that many organizations are jumping headfirst into them, and they're just saying they're going to build to that particular use case. And then somebody in a department two doors over sees a similar or a different use case, and they build to that too. And what we're seeing are very many the propagation of many silos of generative AI implementation. And sooner or later, and typically these are being built outside of the organization's AI governance organization. So typically, again, like I mentioned, financial services, been doing AI for a long time. They got the people who really fully understand it. They're not necessarily the ones who are building the applications today. They're either other development groups or business groups too that are very excited about the ability to apply it to a use case that's going to provide really quick ROI. So who's to stop them? Problem is they get to a point where either they are about to go to deployment and they realize that the things that they needed to do around governance and security and everything weren't necessarily done or may not have been done properly. And it stops them from getting production. Or maybe they get to production, but they realize that the processes that they use couldn't really be repeated by other organizations. Or they have to step back and say, oh, well, and how do we actually enable it? So like Robert mentioned, the first deployment or application is going to cost this much time and effort. The second one should be significantly less. The third one should be significantly less, where if you were to build a factory, the millionth thing that you produce out of the factory is going to be much less expensive to produce than the first thing. It's the way it should be. But what's happening is that everybody's the equal costs across every use case. They're not getting any economies of scale because they haven't built the infrastructure to start with first. So the one thing I can say is, before you get too deep into a specific use case, before you invest too much in the delivery and the outcome solely targeted at that one business use, think about the architecture, think about the infrastructure, think about governance, and think about how you're going to organize the organization to build this at scale. Think about if you're going to be delivering 100 of these a week, what do you need to put in place to support that? And it means not just being able to generate the code quickly, but how do you deploy it and manage that code, manage the models quickly, understanding that this is all going to be changing rapidly. The way we are looking at and using generative AI 2 years from now, even 1 year from now, is probably going to be quite different than it is today. I mean, if you go back 18 months, I don't think that anybody really coined agentic AI. As a name. And all of a sudden now we're all talking about it. 3 years ago, generative AI was not even on anybody's common vernacular. so much is changing so fast. So if you don't build for that agility, it's going to be really challenging for you to do anything at scale. So as you think about that enterprise architecture, to do that, get that infrastructure right, to get the governance right, get the data architecture and data infrastructure and governance correct as well.
I was having a conversation with someone about agentic AI, and they were comparing it to traditional generative AI, which was a sign of how quickly everything is moving. I'd like to get some closing thoughts from each of you. There's a lot here for decision makers to think about. What would be the most important takeaways for financial service leaders from this discussion, if you could highlight one message that you'd like them to take away? Dan, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's a follow-on from what I was just saying, and that's the pace of change is happening so fast with this that if you look at how long did it take for the first LLM to come out, and then even the second iteration on those LLMs, versus now the pace of change we're seeing in foundation models, not just the number of models available, but how quickly they iterate, how quickly the large ones iterate. That's all going to get faster. The GPU availability is going to get better. So that, and then the cost is going to come down more significantly. That means even greater change. I think that organizations leveraging internal, not just use of GenAI, but much more model development and model fine tuning on their own is going to be big for them. And then we just mentioned agentic AI and the new use cases and thinking differently about how applications are being done. So going back to the point is, the key thing when you think about your architecture is how do you be agile? How do you build your infrastructure so that it can rapidly change with the changing times? So you've got to build knowing that everything is going to change. If you build something today with the expectation it's going to be same a year from now, you will be behind a year from now. So the thing that means is have an organizational vision for what you're going to do, a kind of a guiding North Star for what your plan is for the broad use of AI and generative AI. Implement responsible practices that really guide how people adapt to those changes. Put into governance, have the infrastructure that allows you to scale. And ultimately going back to what we both have been stating here is it does start with the data. And it does start with figuring out how you're going to effectively use the data throughout your organization and how, we're going to get new data sources popping up all the time too. You want to be able to incorporate that quickly. What's going to be the processes for that? Net, the common thing, don't try to back into it. Think about it up front and get it right.
Thanks, Dan. Robert, any parting thoughts from you for executives in terms of the key messages you'd like them to take away from today?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. As someone who's in marketing, I was trying to think of, it's like a catchy phrase for financial firms, but I got to admit, the only thing I could think of is that, the AI-powered, financial institution, right? Is sort of the catchiest phrase I could come up with for this webinar. But it's not a futuristic concept. It's here. It's now. Many organizations, many financial organizations, are really doing complex agentic workflows, such as one of our customers, OCBC Bank. So the conversation, everybody's talking about Gen AI, everybody's talking about agentic AI. And to Dan's point, that growth over the past few years has been incredible. Every day I look at, and read the latest AI news, and there's a new model, there's a new tool, new technique, new improvement. Now we have O4 reasoning models from ChatGPT, and you can just see that path of more complex, more capable models being released every day, and the open source models being very close, only a few months behind at most at this point, if not basically on par with the managed models. So as the firms embrace AI, again, to some of the points I made earlier, success ultimately depends on the quality and ability to access all of the enterprise data. And then it's the trust in the process and all the AI techniques, and of course the models that you're using. Some of that uncertainty can be reduced if, for example, you use Falcon or Mistral models to ultimately assure all of those predictable outcomes. And in the end, for everybody, it's about maximizing ROI while reducing TCO, while delivering all those desired business outcomes. So to sum it all up, having a unified data and AI platform with consistent security, governance, data accessibility, and observability are all critical components to delivering on that vision, to that phrase that I used earlier, on that AI-powered financial institution.
Thank you so much, Dan, Robert. This has been a fascinating conversation, but also a very practical one at a time of a lot of flux and opportunity and a lot of change for financial services. So your advice is going to be well received by our audience. So thank you both for your time today.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.